everyone. I am here to talk a little bit about why your healing diet may not have worked for you. I have now worked with hundreds of clients trying to use nutrition as medicine, and a lot of people who come to me, I am not the first nutritionist they have seen. I am not the first approach they have tried. And so when clients come to me, or people message me or comment on my videos, very often they're saying, well, I tried this approach or that approach. It didn't work. I didn't get the results I wanted, so I'm feeling really defeated. I feel like I want to give up and not try anymore. And I totally understand that. I also have felt very frustrated early on in my recovery journey when I was doing things that I thought were going to help my healing, and it just didn't give me the same results that I thought it was going to. So these are the top reasons I see people not recover on a therapeutic diet. First of all, what do I mean by a therapeutic diet? I mean one that is using a model of nutrition as medicine. So it's looking at the nutrients of foods as well as therapeutic properties of different foods and maybe inflammatory or not as helpful property of other foods. And it's trying to really construct a diet in a way that is going to facilitate your healing or recovery from a chronic illness. Nutritional interventions are so important because every cell of our body is made up of the nutrients that we are eating every day, and nutrition modulates so much of our physical bodies. So we do want to really take nutrition seriously. We are trying to take a natural healing approach, but there are a lot of nuances to this. One thing I will say is that the sicker you are, probably the more restrictive an approach you will need to recover. I know that that might seem a little harsh, but the reality is the sicker we are, the more sensitive we're going to be, and the more that small details in our diet are going to matter more. So if people are maybe dealing with some high blood pressure, maybe they're a little overweight, they've got a little bit of depression, overall they're functioning fine day to day, they've just got these minor, stubborn symptoms, they could probably do a pretty minimal therapeutic dietary approach and get really good results. Other people are going to do all the basics and see nothing change. And that's because their symptoms are coming from a deeper place of depletion or imbalance, and more things are going to need to be implemented to see any kind of result. So I, of course, am going to be biased towards the people who are going to have more complex, long-standing symptoms because those are the kinds of people that come to me. So I'm sorry to say it, but just eliminating processed foods is probably not going to do it for you. That's a great first step, and oh my gosh, if everyone in the Western world did that, we would see a massive reduction in chronic disease. So again, it's a really good first step and important for a lot of people, but if you have more complex illness, not eating fast food, not eating, candy, not eating, frozen dinners, that probably won't be enough. The other thing is that when people are doing these more popular therapeutic diets, so for example, I would say AIP, a basic paleo diet, or a basic kind of ketogenic diet, these are the ones that people come to me the most often and they're saying, well, I tried this and it didn't do anything. I am really focused on rebalancing the gut microbiome, and the approach I use for that is the specific carbohydrate diet. I am a GAPS practitioner. This stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome, and this is based on the principles of the specific carbohydrate diet, which has been used in various forms for over 100 years. And the idea here is that when we have significant damage and imbalance in the digestive tract and the gut microbiome, we develop a complex carbohydrate intolerance. So this means that it's not just about gluten, it's not just about soy, it's not just about dairy, it's not just about these top inflammatory food allergens that people will very frequently initially eliminate in their diet. But it's actually all complex carbohydrates that are causing a problem. This doesn't mean that those foods are bad. Things like potatoes and cassava and legumes, these are totally normal foods to eat in an ancestral context, and many traditional cultures eat these and they do just fine. However, when we have deeper, more complex illness, these foods can become a real stumbling block to our recovery. And I've worked with so many people who they've done paleo, they've even done AIP. I've actually never worked with someone that recovered on AIP, or at least maybe didn't, they made some improvements, but then they were stuck on that diet for the rest of their life. They were never able to expand their diet again. So I would be so curious. Please reach out to me if you know someone who has actually fully recovered and is fully in remission from doing AIP. But I think the problem here is that most people who are doing those diets are still eating starch. Even a lot of people who are doing a keto diet are still eating a lot of starch. So this is complex carbohydrate, is also called starch. And so these are the foods and grains, legumes, a lot of root vegetables and things like that. And so even if you are eating a really healthy ancestral diet, if you have really complex symptoms and you have a lot of gut imbalance and a lot of damage in the gut lining, it may not be enough. And I find when people have been doing those kinds of diets and not seeing results, when we cut the starch out, it's a game changer. People experience these incredible healing trajectories over the course of 3, 6, 9, 12 months. So it's not that it's immediate, but we actually start to see the needle move. We actually start to see progress in the health of the gut, and then people can add those foods back in 1 to 2 years down the road without their symptoms reoccurring. So it does seem to be a way to actually get on top of the deeper root cause of the issue, reverse that so you are not stuck on this very restrictive diet forever. So does your diet contain starch? That would be the first question I would ask. And again, when I get people who feel like they're doing all the right things, but they feel stuck, if I look at their food list, almost always they are still including things like a sweet potato, cassava flour, tapioca starch, like Siete products, which is a wonderful company, by the way. So that's not me throwing hate on that company. They do wonderful, wonderful products, but they're not appropriate for people who are still very ill. They're great for people who are trying to maintain remission from their illness and maybe have very mild health issues. The second thing that happens is that people say, oh, I went on this very restrictive therapeutic diet and all my hair fell out and I lost all this weight and I felt terrible and my hormones got all messed up and my thyroid got all messed up and all these bad things happened. So now I'm scared of doing anything restrictive. Again, I can really resonate with this. I also got very underweight and fatigued when I started really getting on some more restrictive diets as well. And I do see this happen in a lot of my clients. So some of this is just a healing crisis that happens in the body. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about patience and timeline. But the other factor I see is that when people cut starch out of their diet, like when people make these big shifts in their diet and they're primarily now eating things like meat and vegetables, what happens is that they don't know how to actually structure a plate that has enough calories because they're used to the starch taking up the most room on their plate, right? The rice or the beans or the piece of bread or the potatoes. That's like the bulk of the plate, right? It's the most bulky of the food. So when you cut that out, oh, okay, I'm just going to eat the meat and vegetables. But we actually have to make up those calories in fat primarily. So when we are cutting out carbohydrates from our diet, we have to replace the energy we were getting from those carbohydrates, even if in reality we weren't getting that much energy from it. But we have to replace that with fat in our diet as a substitute calorie and energy source. And so a lot of people cut the starch out of their diet and then they're eating lean protein and vegetables and maybe cooking it in like a little bit of olive oil. And that is a starvation diet. That is what we call rabbit starvation. So that is where you have a low carb, low fat, high protein diet. And a lot of people are accidentally doing this. our idea of what a high fat diet is so skewed because most people are used to just getting their fat from processed food, right? You buy fast food or packaged food, and it's full of all these really terrible seed oils, and that's where most people are getting most of their fat calories. So you cut out the processed food, and a lot of people start eating things like whole grains and legumes and things like that. And that's great for a lot of people. There are many people who thrive on a diet like that. That is a traditional diet, absolutely. However, you're getting most of your calories now from carbohydrate sources. If we are cutting out those complex carbohydrates, now there's a void of energy. And so we have to replace that with fat. And most people are not used to dousing their food in the amount of fat that is traditionally eaten in cultures that get most of their calories from fat. And so, there is such a range on how much fat traditional cultures eat. But for cultures that are eating lower carbohydrate, it's the majority of calories is coming from fat, like sometimes up to 80%, depending on the culture. And so you really have to get used to cooking in copious amounts of things like butter and ghee and duck fat and pork lard and olive oil and coconut oil. You really have to do a lot more than you think you do. And it can be a little weird at first especially if you grew up with a, low fad mom from, the 70s through 90s, I think was pretty much like the low fat fad era. But this is actually what it takes. And I have so many clients that they don't feel good. They've been trying to be consistent and they just don't feel right. And we track their calories, and sure enough, they're eating like 800, 900, 1,000 calories a day. And they had no idea they were eating so little. So they're just eating like these lean proteins, like lean steak or chicken breast, and it's just filling them up right away because protein is very satiating. And then they're eating a pile of vegetables, but there's not many calories in vegetables. There's a lot of nutrients. There's not a lot of calories. And then they are full because they've eaten a lot of protein, but they haven't actually gotten enough calories. So really learning how to eat enough fat is so important. The other thing that happens is the lack of consistency. And I have people that come to me very often who say, look, I've done this diet for, a year or 2 years, or I've been on a healing diet for 4 years or 5 years, and I really haven't seen any improvement. And when people say that, it's always really interesting to me. Like, I'm always looking for okay, what could be going on here? If they've really been doing this long, why aren't we seeing results? What's blocking it? And so I will often get into a lot of detail in terms of when they started a certain diet, what they were actually eating. And inevitably, very often, it'll turn out that people have not actually been consistent for the time they've said they were on a therapeutic diet. So we live in a culture where we're used to reward days and cheat days and holiday exceptions, right? That's very much a part of our culture around food. And that works if you're just trying to lose weight. If you're just trying to lose weight, taking a cheat day here and there is no problem. You will usually still see results. Unless you start doing a cheat day, every other day, which is often what it kind of devolves into. But if you are trying to heal from a complex chronic illness, those cheat days will completely sabotage you. Like I said in the beginning, the sicker you are, the more on point we have to be, the more nuanced our plan has to be for you. And those small hiccups, oh gosh, but it was my birthday, I just had one bite of cake, or, I was, went to a restaurant with friends and I just had, one corn chip, or, whatever it was. Those little things will make a difference. Until the microbiome is really fully rebalanced, we just cannot have those off-plan days. And so it pays off so much to be completely consistent in the beginning. I'm talking for the first year or two. Hello! Kitty cat is meowing at me. Yeah, do you want to join in? So we really need to be mindful of those little excuses that we can make in our head around but it's a holiday, but I'm on vacation, but I didn't feel good today, but I was late, coming home from work. We can always find a reason to go off plan, but the people who are successful are the people that go 100% and they don't make excuses and they stick to what they're doing. We want to see this as you are using this food as medicine. And if you are on a critical medication, you would not skip your medication dosages, right? You would just take it as prescribed if you wanted to see the results. And when we're using nutrition in that very medical way, it is the same thing. So making sure that you're actually being consistent for that 1 to 2 year period of time that it usually takes to really rebalance the gut microbiome and replenish nutrient deficiencies. The next one is going to be the lack of patience. So I kind of started talking about this a moment ago, but I didn't want to get too far down that road because I wanted to devote this whole section to it. When I first started eating a very therapeutic diet, I also fell into the trap of not really understanding how much fat I actually really needed to eat. And so I lost a lot of weight very quickly, and I felt horrible because when we lose fat, and I was not overweight before, but any bit of fat that you store on your body holds toxins. Fat is really toxin storage, at least that's a part of it. And so when we lose fat, all that toxic load dumps into our bloodstream, and we can feel really sick when we lose weight to fat if we are very ill. And so that was part of it, is that I was under eating calories initially until I kind of figure out how to really actually structure a nourishing therapeutic diet with more fat. But also, no matter how well you are doing with your calories, no matter how well you are balancing your macros, and I try to be really specific with my clients on their meal plans in terms of like this much fat, this much protein, you know, this much vegetable, so people really know how to structure their plates well. Even if you are doing all of that to the T, you're getting enough calories. When we start treating nutrition as medicine and we really start giving every cell in our body the building blocks to regenerate damaged tissue and to detoxify and to shift our microbiome in a favorable way, all of those things can cause what is called a healing response in the body. Some people call it the healing crisis, because this is where the body actually is able to dig deep down into the sewer, into the trenches, and really pull up all of that guck, all of that icky stuff that has been deep in your tissues for so long. So our body is really good at masking underlying factors. We can have a whole lot of gut dysbiosis before we start really getting critical symptoms. We can have quite a high toxic load before our body starts showing signs of that toxicity. When we actually start giving our body the tools to deal with those root causes, it really has a backlog to deal with. And so the first month can be especially brutal for people, but often up to the first 6 months can be really hard. Or what happens is people will have these really big ups and downs where they feel better for a week or two and then they feel bad again. They feel better for a week or two and then they feel bad again. It's like every time your body is getting a little bit more energy, a little bit more nutrient level, it's just taking on a new project and it's pulling more trash out of the gutters. And that makes us feel really sick. So people often do get very pale, or they may kind of get like a yellow tint to their skin, or they may get really dark circles under their eyes. They may look very pale and gaunt for a while. They may lose more weight than they really wanted to. Again, we do want to make sure that you are on paper getting enough calories, getting enough nutrients, but all that, being true, sometimes it is just a healing crisis. You want to put your input in on this, Willy? Willy doesn't know anything about this. So we have to be really patient, because that healing crisis is actually a very important part of the recovery, and people will just override it over and over and over again because they want to see results and they think, I'm on a healing diet, I should feel better, right? But depending on how sick they are, they may actually feel a lot worse for a while. So patience is key. I always tell people give it at least 6 months. If you're doing any kind of therapeutic diet, I don't care if it's mine or anyone else's, if you're doing any kind of therapeutic diet, you have to give it 6 months solid. And then, if in 6 months you really, of consistency, right, getting enough calories, getting enough fat, not eating starch, if you have given it a solid 6 months of that, I will give it to you. Okay, maybe this is not the issue for you. Maybe there's something else we need to look at. But nearly everyone I've worked with, if they're willing to give it that amount of time, they do start seeing results if they're willing to put in that work. But that leads me to my last point, is that nutrition is a lot. I would say nutrition is probably 50% of our health overall, because again, these are the building blocks to every cell in our body. So how our cell functions is going to completely be reliant on the food that we are eating every day and how that's modulating our microbiome and, so many other things. So yes, therapeutic nutritional protocol is essential. However, it is not the only thing. And this is where people who really, truly have been that diligent, they really have been on point, starch-free, not cheating, not going off plan, they've been patient, they have been eating enough, and they're not seeing results. Well, what then? Because there are those people. There truly are those people. And there were other factors for me too. If I had just done a nutritional approach and nothing else, I probably would not have fully recovered. And that is why the programs that I run are so all-encompassing, especially immune resilience, which is geared for the most sensitive of my clients. I have a 6-month program called Immune Resilience, where people who are very highly sensitive, very highly reactive, have very complex chronic illness, can come work with me or one of my coaches for 6 months. It's very all-encompassing because it's very heavy on nutrition, but there's a lot of other things as well. So some of that is circadian rhythm. There are people who have a really difficult time having enough exposure to sunlight and avoiding blue light exposure. So maybe it's because you work in an office job all day, you live in a far northern climate, or you live in a more equatorial climate, but you are very heat intolerant, heat and sweat intolerant. Or you are, not really optimizing your schedule, you're staying up late, you're sleeping in. There are a lot of factors around circadian rhythm that we need to address. And I have been more and more strict with my clients on this point because I really see when people are able to consistently get outside, and even if they're sun intolerant, very slowly titrate up their exposure. If they're able to really manage their blue light exposure, by shifting their work, or just being sure to have filters on their screens. There's a lot of things that we can do to optimize your circadian rhythm, really shifting your schedule if we need to around when you go to sleep and when you get up, and how we can shift your lifestyle to support those changes. That can be a game changer when people aren't seeing results just with nutrition. I also tend to ask people about their relationships and their trauma history and their habitual responses to stressors. So this goes into trauma and nervous system regulation as well as mindset. And I have seen people who are the most diligent, just, completely disciplined, 100% on plan with their nutrition. And that is part of what is feeding into this perfectionist type A personality that is not allowing their nervous system to feel safe enough to take advantage of all the things that they are doing for their health with nutrition. And so we do have to really work on our personality type and the way we are approaching the healing process. Because if we are seeing it as a chore, if we are seeing our nutrition as something that we just have to do, and we have to do it perfect, and we have to cross it off the list, the to-do list, right? And then this is going to definitely give us this result, right? And if it doesn't, then, oh my gosh, I must have done something wrong. But you can see how that whole mindset is a very constrictive, very rigid, very scarcity focused kind of mindset. And so this is why in our immune resilience program, we focus so much on the nervous system regulation piece. We want people to address their past traumas through doing trauma release exercises. We don't actually delve into the trauma memories, but we learn to work with the nervous system to let energy stuck in the body release. And we also do a lot of work on mindset, and we use techniques like neuromeditation and EFT tapping to help change our habitual responses to triggers and stressors and even our own symptoms. And so sometimes our nervous system patterns get very ingrained, often from the time we are very little children. But if we have a lot of traumatic experiences, even into adulthood and with the process of how we got sick, that can really change the way that we live our lives and the way we engage in relationships, both with other people and with ourselves. And so, I often will tell people, look, if this is truly something you're not seeing results with in terms of nutrition, like, you need to double down on the nervous system regulation work, not as something that, again, you go to check off the list. Like, oh, I did my meditation, I did my tapping, I did my, TRE, I did my trauma release. Okay, I'm done, I'm good. But actually as a way to change how you live your life. So it's not just an activity you do and then you move on from. It's an experience you have that then shifts the entire way that you experience yourself and experience the world. And if that's not what it's doing for you, then you're missing the point of it. So those are my breakdowns of why your healing diet might not be working. Please check out all that we have to offer at wholebodyhealingwithjen.com and leave a comment below to tell me what your reaction to this is.